Hello again, everyone. Saka here. And first off, thank you so much for the response on the first Dune breakdown video. It was really fun to talk to folks who love Dune as much as I do, and some of your comments put me back on the right track, jogged my memory, reminded me of such things, and you even have your own theories on what's going on in this trailer. Today we are going pretty deep into the trailer itself, and we're going to be discussing spoilers. So if you do not want the movie spoiled, then this video is not for you. I'm going to talk about what happened in the book pretty extensively based on what these scenes show. So let's go ahead and get into it. So nothing to talk about spoiler-wise as far as Legendary is concerned. But Paul, we already discussed, 15 years old, grew up in the palace on Caladan, and he has these dreams. One thing that I did not talk about was the content of the dreams in which he describes to the Reverend Mother during the trial of the Gom Jabbar. He sees a people worshiping water. He sees this girl with blue within blue eyes, and he's sort of terrified of her at first, as he's never seen a creature with eyes such as that. One sentence that is that he remembers exclusively is, "Tell me about the waters of your homeworld Usul," and he has no idea what Usul means. Spoiler alert, it's the base of the pillar. It's Paul's first Fremen name. Before he chooses a name for himself and becomes part of a tribe, he is known as Usul. And that is sort of the foreshadowing that Paul sees going forward when Chani asks him to tell her about the waters of the homeworld. She doesn't imagine a world that Paul currently lives on, with lakes and rain. And she almost gets emotional when he tells the story of, we have great oceans of water, lakes that you can't even see across, water that falls from the sky. Just all of this idea that water is so plentiful is heartbreaking to the Fremen, but they hope to change that in the future thanks to Dr. Kynes. But we'll get into that when we see Dr. Kynes once again. Once we see this scene here, people have said that this is Chani. This might also be Jessica. This could be when Paul and Jessica make their escape from the initial attack from the Harkonnen, looking back at Arrakeen and seeing all of the devastation that was left behind. Paul and Jessica were able to escape from aid from the traitor. The Atreides were betrayed by a very close person in the house, which when we see them in the trailer, I will go into more detail, but Paul and Jessica escape thanks to help from that traitor, because the traitor did not want to see the entire family die. The traitor was only doing what they needed to save their wife from the Baron Harkonnen, because the Baron Harkonnen is behind the plot, as you may have imagined, and he doesn't want blood on his hands. He will do whatever he can to truthfully say that he has no idea what happened to them. If they end up dead, then I don't know how they ended up there. So he does everything he can to put as many people in between him and his plot. And then he eventually ends up getting rid of those people who were involved in the plot, because as the Baron Harkonnen says, never trust a traitor, not even one that you create. So this is Paul and, I imagine, Jessica looking back on Arrakeen. And then we have the trial of the Gom Jabbar. This morning of the trial, Paul noticed that Jessica was very nervous, and his mother always carries herself with an air of dignity and composure, as most Bene Gesserit do. So when Paul saw his mother visibly nervous and short and to the point, telling him, "Get dressed, I need you in the study. Just don't ask questions, just get dressed, get in the study," it triggered Paul's, senses. The hairs on the back of his head stood up, because his mother is speaking in a way that he isn't used to hearing her speak. So he knew something was going on, but he didn't know when he met this old woman how lethal she would indeed be. But this is his dress coat, and this is a trial that all Bene Gesserit go through. And Jessica knew that this day was going to be coming, and when Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Moham arrived at the doorstep, she knew exactly what she was there to do, and she could not tell Paul. She cannot help Paul. Before this scene here, I'm looking for in the movie to be Jessica dismissed, just very matter-of-factly by the Reverend Mother. "Jessica, you may leave." And Jessica will do so without nary a word, which also Paul is not used to seeing his mother being bossed around, especially by a stranger that he's never met before. He says, "How dare you dismiss the Lady Jessica as a common servant?" And the Reverend Mother will respond with, "Well, she was a servant. She was my servant." So in the realm of the Bene Gesserit, the Reverend Mother outranks Jessica, which puts the Reverend Mother sort of over Paul in a hierarchical sort of position, which Paul is only used to being number 2 behind his father. So that alone is a great wake-up call for Paul to know that he is in a place that he is very uncomfortable and not used to seeing. So the Reverend Mother will ask him about his dreams, basically just give him a few questions, and then the Reverend Mother will also use the voice. That's one thing that we didn't talk about in the initial trailer, was the ability for the Bene Gesserit to almost use what a Jedi mind trick. They modulate their voice just so that the voice buries deep within their mind, and it's almost like a very persuasive suggestion that they have to carry it out. Whenever people take Bene Gesserit hostages, the first thing they'll do is gag their mouths, because people who are familiar with the Bene Gesserit know all it takes is a Bene Gesserit to speak, and you'll be doing their bidding. So the Reverend Mother will use the voice on Paul, and he will initially not be convinced by the voice. His training will shine through. And that is sort of the first point that the Reverend Mother perks up and says, okay, this boy has been trained. Let's see what he's really got when it comes to the trial of the box. The box filled with pain and the Gom Jabbar. That Gom Jabbar will be used eventually, spoiler, to kill the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen in the last scenes of the movie. It's going to happen next movie. The book 1 is separated into 2 movies, so you're not going to see the Gom Jabbar after this scene until that happens, and it will be wielded by Paul's unborn sister, Alia of the Knife. She is unborn, but Jessica will drink what's called the water of life, which is also referenced here in the scene with Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Moham. In order to become a Reverend Mother, you will drink the water of life, which is the water from a drowned sandworm. A baby sandworm is held underwater, and the water that it vomits up as it dies is very poisonous, very lethal to anyone not trained to purify it within themselves, as Bene Gesserit are trained to do or inherently know how to do. This allows knowledge to be passed on from Reverend Mother to Reverend Mother to Reverend Mother. So as each Reverend Mother is consecrated through the water of life, she will know everything that has been known to those Reverend Mothers before her. And males are not supposed to drink this water of life, which Paul will eventually do. But as Jessica drinks this water of life with Alia inside of her still, Alia, by proxy of being the baby attached to the mother, will also inherit all of the knowledge from all of the Reverend Mothers before her, and it freaks the Fremen out that live amongst her, because she will be saying like, oh, that baby looks like so-and-so from 10 years ago, and the Fremen are like, how in the crap does she know this? She shouldn't know this. She's an abomination. She's something other. She's something that should not be. But of course, they don't want to go against the word of Jessica, the Reverend Mother, and Paul, who they see as the Messiah. That's his sister. So they don't want to raise a hand against her, but they are very uncomfortable around his sister, Alia the Knife, or Alia the Abomination. So Paul will put his hand in the box. It'll be interesting to see if this particular movie shows his hand crisping what Paul sees. And in this scene with Gurney Halleck fighting, so Gurney and Paul spar, pretty common training, as a Duke's son is tend to do. And this is after the trial of the box. And Paul will say that he isn't in the mood to fight. His mind it's elsewhere because of this trial. He is shaken to his core, and he doesn't want to knife fight with Gurney on this particular day. And Paul will drop his shield and say, you know what, Gurney, I'm just not in the mood. And Gurney will respond with, not in the mood. Mood is a thing for cattle and making love, not fighting. And Gurney will strike at Paul, and Gurney will not let up in this scene. Gurney will fight every bit as hard as he normally would, expecting Paul to rise to the occasion. And that is Gurney's lesson, that fighting will come to you whether you want it to or not, and you better fight within your complete capacity, or Gurney was going to give him a good scar to remind him of that. One thing that we see here in the shield training that someone brought up is as the slow, the attacks of the knife, there are the quick little slices, and that would be the blue flashes that reflect off of the shield, but the slow knife penetrates the shield. It's the slow knife that ultimately does damage, and that could be what is signified here with the red, that the slow knife has penetrated Paul's shield, and it's right at his chest. In this particular part of the scene, Paul will ask Gurney, "Do you yield?" Because Paul will have a knife at Gurney's throat, and Paul thinks he's the victor until Gurney tells him to look down, in which the knife will be right there in a critical area for Paul, and Gurney will say, "We will have joined each other in death, and you've certainly found the mood." So that is a good comment from before about the shield and the fast blade and the slow knife. Very plausible indeed. Thank you for that. So it looks like this is the do you yield part of the fight between Gurney and Paul. And here we have Arakeen and Jessica. In these particular initial scenes, we are going to see Fremen customs that deals with water, especially the water cellar. There will be a Fremen girl outside the gates of the palace or the doors of the palace, and she will hear the calling from inside. And she will see that the Fremen will take water squeezings into a cup and then take money. The first thing that Jessica does to put her foot down and says that we run Arrakis now and we are not going to live like Harkonnen is to say that anyone who comes to the door with a cup gets one cup for free, which blows the Fremen's minds because under Harkonnen oppression, they were used to doing things their own way. They were not used to being given anything. They weren't used to charity. So when Jessica comes in and says, you get a free cup of water, that sort of solidifies their belief that a Messiah will come with a Bene Gesserit mother, and they will sort of test Jessica in these initial scenes. The housekeeper named Shadout Mapes will sort of give code words, and Jessica will respond with the old language. And Jessica will accidentally say the right thing in one or two occasions, really freaking out the Shadout Mapes. The Shadout Mapes brings what's called a Christ knife or a Chris knife, and nobody outside of Fremen Sieges will be able to see a Christ knife and live. But she will present this Christ knife to Jessica to see how she will respond, and she will say the word maker. Jessica wanted to say maker of death, but in Fremen tongue, the maker is the sandworm. And so the Christ knife is made from sandworm teeth. Jessica, being from Offworld, would not have known that, but when she said maker, the Shadout Mapes freaked out and automatically assumed, and Jessica became really privy of reading that body language saying, okay, I'm on the right track here. I'm not going to screw this up by continuing to talk. I'm going to see how this unfolds. So Jessica knows about the prophecy, and she actually manipulates her actions and Paul's actions to fit within the dichotomy of this prophecy. She doesn't think that she and Paul are part of this prophecy, but she will live this prophecy to stay alive as long as she can and be safe and protected by these Fremen who won't let anything happen to her if it is proven that she is part of the prophecy. So she very carefully dances around the Shadout Mapes, making sure that she says the right thing and carries herself like, yes, we are the prophecy, and garner that respect right from the get-go. So Jessica, being Bene Gesserit, is very good at reading people, reading voices, speaking in tongues and code, and that goes all to her advantage. Here we see someone that I didn't mention in the initial breakdown trailer, Thuffer Howitt, who is what's called a mentat. In the future, humanity has sort of sworn off computers, technology. They live very basely. They don't like machines. So what they do is they train these people from a very young age who is very adept in logic, mathematics, statistics to become what's called a mentat, and they have what's called the sappho juice, which will stain their lips purple. So you always know a mentat when you see it, and it does look like he has a little bit of purple stain here. But Thuffer's main goal is to provide the Duke with hard numbers and facts. We have this much equipment, we bring in this much money per year, this percentage of to the Emperor, we maintain this much percentage, we can do this much and then manipulate this. So he's a very min-maxer. If he was a video gamer, he would be great at strategy because he knows all of the different modifiers, all of the different things, all the different percentages to get the best ideal outcome and present that to the Duke. They were actually training Paul to be a mentat. He shows a lot of mental acuity and the quickness of thought and the logic behind each action. And Duke Leto was like, look, when I pass on, you're going to be a mentat Duke, and you would be very powerful because you wouldn't need an advisor. You would know exactly what to do right from the get-go. So Paul was sort of being groomed to be a mentat. Him and Thuffer were really close in their studies, and Thuffer saw that in Paul as well, that he could be a very powerful mentat and a very formidable Duke. So here we have Duncan, Idaho, who, as I said in the initial breakdown video, was sent ahead of the main family to garner good relations with the Fremen. Duncan will unfortunately not live to tell the tale too awful long after the initial attack. I don't know if that's going to be in this movie or the next, but poor Duncan will die protecting Paul and Jessica and Dr. Kynes, fending off a bunch of Harkonnen troops who are out hunting for them because word got out that they survived the initial plot in which they were supposed to be killed. They lived, and now they were being hunted. Duncan will find them, which I believe we see in the scene towards the later part of this trailer in which he says, "My Duke." That is after Duke Leto is confirmed dead, and Paul has assumed the ducal title. And Duncan does everything within his power to protect Paul and all the way to the end. A great friend indeed. So Stilgar, the Naib of the local siege in which Duncan was a part of, and Stilgar is very powerful in the fact that he commands a small troop of Fremen and he speaks on their behalf. Knowing Duncan and the initial interaction between himself and Duncan survived an attack, but a few Fremen were struck down, and Duncan was able to administer sort of basic first aid. He did his best to try to save Fremen lives and ultimately could not do it. So the water that belonged to that tribesman was sort of in debt to the Atreides, and that's what got Stilgar thinking, well, let me talk to this Duke, because his man tried to save one of ours, and it's a debt of water. The water of this fallen Fremen belongs to the Duke, and therefore we can ask for Duncan's water in our tribe as a bond, not like an absolute trust, but to say, I'll give you a little, you give me a little, and we'll see where we go from there. So it's a great first step to establish initial Fremen-Atreides relations between Stilgar and Duncan. This is during the scene in which they're discussing how spice harvesting works. Why would the Harkonnen just pack up and leave? Does anyone think the Harkonnen would just give this up on a whim, making all of this money? This has to be a trap. That's one thing that Duke Leto knew going into this is absolutely a trap. But knowing there's a trap is the first step in evading it. So during that briefing in which Duke Leto says, you know, we're here, it's probably a trap, but let's make the most of it, Stilgar comes in, and during this exchange in which, hey, the water of my tribesmen will belong to you, your Duncan's water will belong to us. In order to seal the deal, Stilgar will do something that is way out of the ordinary for the Atreides. He will spit across the Duke's desk. Now, Gurney was about to cut Stilgar to ribbons because in their culture that is very disrespectful. But Duncan knew, spending time with the Fremen, that the gift of water, just the act of spitting and giving up that water to never be given back, is the ultimate sign of respect. It's sort of like, you know, let's shake on it and you spit in your hand. That seals the deal. So a gift of water from a Fremen, even by spitting, is a very big deal. when Paul cries for the dead. That is a big deal because Fremen don't usually cry. That's a waste of water to have water just run down and evaporate. It doesn't go into your still suit. So when you shed water to the dead, that is another gift that is so on a high level. And that's where the appreciation really comes in, knowing that water is everything to a Fremen. So spitting, crying, even sneezing. No one sneezed, but even a sneeze would be you're giving up water. Like, this is a big, big deal. So fighting the initial attack from the Harkonnen, the Baron will say in the first scene in which we see the Baron, there's one or two different things that can happen. In the book, the Baron says very clearly who the traitor is that he has planted. He will say who the traitor is. In the movie, they may try to keep the audience behind the curtain. They did this in the 1984 movie and the 2000 series. They'll say, no, the traitor is my little secret for now, keeping the audience, the movie-going audience, in the dark. But in the book, he says plainly, I have Dr. Yui's wife, and I told Dr. Yui that he would be reunited with his wife if he helped me infiltrate the Atreides and kill the Duke. Bring me the Duke alive, and he will see his wife again. Baron Harkonnen wants to gloat over the Duke. He doesn't want the Duke just dead. He wants to parade around. He wants the Duke to know who has defeated him. So that is a big character trait that Baron Harkonnen likes to revel in his ideas. He likes to savor his big plans and what he's done. He wants to say, look how smart I am. So he tells Rabban and Feyd-Rautha that he has planted Dr. Yui, and they'll never suspect him because he has that diamond on his forehead, the Imperial conditioning, but he was able to break through that by attaining something very personal to the Doctor, his wife. They won't know who the traitor is, but they'll never suspect the real traitor because the real traitor couldn't possibly deceive them. Here we have the initial attack on Arrakeen. There's Dr. Yui there. Dr. Yui, throughout the book, is very troubled. You can tell that he's holding back, and he knows that Jessica is a master of body language. And if he gives one tell that he is going to betray, it's going to throw everything away. So he is very careful with what he says and what he does. But you can tell that he does not want to go through with it. And that's sort of redeeming for the audience to say, well, the Baron had his wife. He doesn't really want to. He doesn't enjoy any of this. And in fact, he gives Duke Leto a weapon to use against the Baron to try to kill him when the Baron does gloat over him. He's going to pull out one of Duke Leto's teeth, implant a poisonous tooth that Duke Leto can bite down on and exhale, and blow this very dense poison into the Baron's face, killing him and giving Duke Leto and Dr. Yui the last laugh. But there is your traitor. Thanks to Dr. Yui, Duke Leto will be brought to the Baron. So here, someone commented about the suspensors. I called them repulsors. Didn't mean to. They're suspensors. It's the same technology that keeps the Baron afloat. And obviously, if the suspensors are strong enough to keep a floating fat man afloat, then they're strong enough to keep these soldiers afloat. What the Atreides don't know, and what they will soon find out, is the Harkonnens will press the attack, and these will be Harkonnen uniforms, but they will be aided by what's called Imperial Sardaukar. The Empire has these shock troops that are known throughout the universe as the most vicious fighting force ever seen. If Sardaukar show up to your door, you don't stand a chance. The Harkonnen has recruited a legion of these Sardaukar to help join them and take over Arrakeen and kill the Atreides under the guise of Harkonnen. It will look like just interfamilial feuding, and the Emperor will not be involved from the outside. And the Baron will probably supply their Sardaukar, or maybe even the Sardaukar themselves, have these suspensors, which they use to float down from a drop ship. But the battle could not be won at all. It was stacked way against the Atreides. They were going to lose with those Sardaukar, and that was one of Baron Harkonnen's great secrets, is there were Sardaukar here, and we don't want that getting out at all. So we don't know if this scar here above the eye is a sort of a semblance of a Sardaukar troop, sort of a dead giveaway. These Sardaukar are trained on a planet called Salusa Secundus. And it is known as the most inhospitable planet in the universe, a prison planet from very young age. They're tortured, they're beaten. Think about, or Spetsnaz, how they were trained. Just sheer pain and suffering and anguish to harden their minds, harden their bodies, and make pain an afterthought. That's what makes them so fierce. What Paul and Duke Leto sort of surmised is Arrakis Dune itself is just as bad as Salusa Secundus. The people that grow up on a planet with no water have to have hard bodies, hard minds, have to be put through the absolute ringer to survive. So a Fremen warrior would be equally or even better than Sardaukar. Further in the story, we hear Fremen talk about, oh yeah, the Emperor's troops, they were okay. And people were like, what do you mean, okay? They've decimated entire families. They've won wars. What are you talking about? Just okay. And it takes 5 or 6 Sardaukar to take down one Fremen. And once Paul learns that, he's like, I got a force. Like, I've got a people that I can mold into an army. Unfortunately for Paul, he also saw that the jihad was coming, that the Fremen would be so behind him because he is the Messiah, he is a religious figure, that they will go out and fight in his name. And he did not want it to come, but every future he saw, it would end in bloodshed on behalf of the Atreides. We murder on behalf of Muad'Dib, or the Mahdi. So that's where the Reverend Mother was talking about the Great Crusade. In the trailer, they call it the Crusade. In the book, they call it the Jihad. Religious war. Following Paul from these religious fighters of Fremen who are more vicious than an Imperial shock troop. So Duncan, very good fighter. We can see the shields here, and the slow blade penetrates the shield. Now, Duncan is not wearing a shield at this point. This would probably be during Duncan's last scene, I would say. In the open desert, you don't want to wear shields. That attracts worms. That could be why Duncan isn't wearing his shield. The Sardaukar don't know better. They haven't lived amongst the Fremen or the Harkonnen. They didn't care. So they come, but Duncan, he just straight up no-shielded. So we see Chani again. Paul will meet Chani. Him and Jessica will stumble upon a small group of Fremen. After the initial sandworm, the running at the end of the trailer that we see, they will come across a group of Fremen, and Chani will be among them. And Jessica will sort of hold Stilgar hostage, or get behind him, hold a knife to his throat, and tell Stilgar, you tell them to stand down. And Stilgar says, look, I can protect the boy because they think he's the Mahdi, but why should I protect you? And Jessica has to do some wheeling and dealing, saying the right thing, doing the right thing to convince the Fremen that she won't slow them down, that she is not a liability, that she can carry her weight. She can fight just as well as them, because Fremen believe that, any slowness, any weakness will slow the entire tribe down, so you're better off just wandering into the desert. In the future, when Paul goes blind, he will himself wander into the desert, because in the old Fremen way, you're worthless. You're only slowing down the tribe, so I'm not going to slow you guys down. You just go ahead. Chani will be within that group and see Paul best a Fremen named Jameis. Paul will knock Jameis over as he scrambles upon the rocks to get out of sight, while Jessica holds Stilgar down on the ground. Chani will say that he made a very sloppy climb, and she can teach him the ways. So Chani will actually become Paul's sort of liaison to the Fremen. Her task will be train Paul, make sure he knows our ways. Eventually, Paul will take her as concubine at the end of the movie. In between, they have a son named Leto, who will ultimately be killed by the Beast Raban in a raid. And eventually, even further down the line, they will have 2 more children named Leto II and Ganama, which is Fremen for prize of war. So that's in the deep, deep future. But for now, Chani, just like Jessica before her, she will not marry Paul. She will be his true love. Paul's wife will only be wife in name. Eventually, it will be the Princess Irulan, daughter of the Emperor, who Paul will marry and basically ascend to the throne. She is married just due to political stability. It's Chani that Paul will love unconditionally. I think this may be a mud bath, very poetic, that the floating fat man, sometimes referred to as house hog, wallows in mud. In this scene, Jessica is looking upset and nervous. I believe this is the scene where she is going to confront Thuffer. So as the story unfolds, Paul has an attempt on his life from what's called a hunter seeker. As he lays in his bed, this little poisoned floating dart comes out of his headboard and is looking for movement. So Paul has to stand perfectly still, and when the Shadow Mapes comes to get him, the hunter seeker will try to go after her. He will grab it and grip it tightly because the suspensor field will make it very slippery on the bottom, and he will break it, saving her life. People will know that they are in danger. This was Raban's plan, not the Baron Harkonnen's. Baron Harkonnen wanted the Atreides to feel safe, but Raban thought, hey, let's put them on edge a little bit. Let's let them see that we can hit them at any time. Let's make them see. So Harkonnen didn't like that. He didn't like how sloppy Raban is. But ever since that point, accusations started forming. People were wondering who is the traitor. Some people assumed it would be Gurney. Some people assumed Jessica. And Jessica was considering Thuffer. So a lot of fingers were being pointed, and Jessica wanted to set the record straight with Thuffer. So after the dinner, Jessica encounters what I call drunken Idaho. Duncan has too much to drink. He starts saying, like, I hate this place. He starts pointing the finger at her, thinking that she's responsible for the traitor, that she could very well be the Harkonnen spy. And Jessica has had enough. So she wants to set the record straight and talk to Thuffer one-on-one. Now, she knows that Thuffer is very capable as well. So she goes back to her chambers to await Thuffer's arrival, and it is such a tense scene. You can cut the tension with a knife. Both of them know, or both of them assume, that each other is the traitor at this point, but neither one of them is going to act and give the other a reason to kill them. So it's, dancing around the fact. And this scene here, I think Jessica is preparing herself to face a potential assassin who she believes is Thuffer. In this particular scene, Dr. Kynes, Lyette Kynes, will give them their still suits. She will shake them down. And the Duke Leto, he looks like soup sandwich. His suit is all unkempt. It's unbuckled. Some of the flaps are not tucked in properly. So Lyette will go over, here's what a still suit does for the audience and for the Atreides. And Lyette will come to Paul and go to adjust it and say, wait, what? Okay, that's right. Wow, your boots are lace desert fashion. Like, what is going on here? Have you ever worn a still suit before? And Paul will say, no, never. It's my first time. It just seemed the proper way to put it on. And Lyette will think about the next part of the prophecy that says that the Mahdi will know your ways as if he were born to them. So here's a guy who is already the son of a Bene Gesserit. That fits the bill first and foremost. Second, he will know your ways as if he was born to them. So he's never worn a still suit before. He knows exactly how to put it on, just like a native Fremen, without any guidance. So Lyette, being very scientific, shakes that off and says, okay, that's two, but that does not mean that he is the Messiah just yet. I'm a man of science. I'm going to steel myself and see what happens from here. They go on this expedition to see what spice harvesting is like. It turns out that there's ornithopters circling the harvester, but there's no carryall, which the Duke notices is very uncharacteristic. Of course, spice harvesting, because of its rhythmic thumping nature, attracts a worm, always. And Paul even asked, does it always call a worm? Yeah, always. So they're waiting on the carryall to show up. It doesn't show up. And Duke Leto has to make a command decision. And he says, all right, we have to save the crew of the Harvester. Everyone land your ornithopters by the Harvester. Get everyone off of that Harvester and into the Ornies. Dump everything out of the Ornies that you can that isn't essential. And we'll just unload as much as we can so we can lift off. Kynes is sort of taken aback by this. Harkonnen would never say, let's save the men. So already he's thinking, okay, the Duke wants to save the people, not the spice. Duke Leto even says, damn the spice, we can always get more. Even the Fremen themselves harvesting the spice does not want to get off of the Harvester. They want to wait until the very last second just in case the carryall shows up. So Duke Leto has to threaten them, I will cut your ship in two with a laser gun. Get off the Harvester. So eventually they acquiesce, knowing that the carryall is missing. Everyone loads up on these Ornies, the spotter Ornies and the Atreides Orni as well. And as they lift off, this thing comes and swallows the Harvester whole. And Duke Leto says someone is going to pay for all of that loss. Where is that Harvester or that carryall? Find me the pilot of that carryall. Find me the carryall itself. And at that point, Kynes sort of, okay, so this is a pretty good guy. Kynes sees that through actions, Duke Leto is following through his words. It's one thing to say, yeah, we want to treat you with respect. It's quite another to follow through with those plans to save the people and demand recompense for the loss of equipment and spice. So this is the scene of them barely pulling up. They're very heavy. The ornithopter has very difficult time lifting off, but eventually it does. And this is looking down at the worm in the very last moments of the Harvester being swallowed. Dr. Yueh marching with Harkonnen. So the keen eye who hasn't seen the movie or read the book will probably know from this scene, oh, that guy's bad news. Yeah, he's the traitor. Here we have Lyette. After a comment that this could be the Shout-Out Mapes, I saw a Q&A with the actors and actresses, and she is indeed Dr. Kynes. So that is confirmed. We have Eric Keen, the Harkonnen, the blood. So Duke Leto will be all alone. He can't sleep that night. He has a very bad feeling. And he sees the Shout-Out Mapes with a knife in her back. And she says that through belabored breath that there's a traitor among you. And she can't quite get out who the traitor is that stabbed her. But this is when Duke Leto finds the Shout-Out Mapes stabbed in the hallway. He is alone. He calls for Gurney, but Gurney is nowhere around. And this is where Dr. Yueh will hit him with a stun dart, a tranquilizer. And Dr. Yueh will give him the speech that, I'm sorry, my Duke, they had my wife, but I will give you a weapon. And he installs the tooth right after this scene. And Duke Leto is rendered incapacitated. He will be drugged heavily on his way to the Baron. If this is the scene with Jameis, this is all wrong. Fremen do not do duels in still suits. They strip down to their underoos. That might be an artistic decision, but if this is the duel with Jameis, this is the first time that Paul has ever had to kill. Paul even asked Jameis, do you yield? In which the Fremen think that Paul is toying with him, because in Fremen culture, when you're called out, it's to the death. There is no yielding. There is no, okay, I made a mistake, let me back up. It's end all. So if this is the scene with Jameis, he shouldn't be wearing a still suit, and neither should Jameis. And then after this, Paul sheds water to the dead. He cries, and Jameis's water will belong to the tribe. He will become the owner of Jameis's water. The tribe will hold it, but Paul will be the owner. He will then get his name after this, named after the mouse shadow on the second moon, called Muad'Dib, wise in the ways of the desert, hunts at night, stays hidden during the day. So they call him Paul Muad'Dib after this. And Paul will actually become caretaker of Jameis's wife and children. So Paul actually gets an apartment after this and lives with Jameis. And you would think it would be awkward, and it's kind of awkward Paul going to his new house and saying, yeah, I'm your new wife, I guess. These are your kids. And it's 15. Paul just, started learning about the ways of these people, and all of a sudden he is indoctrinated into their ways and shoved right into Fremen life. If this isn't Jameis, and they don't have Jameis in this movie, or any of that, then now you know. I don't know if Paul has drunk the water of life here. I don't know how far the movie will go. But eventually what will happen is Paul will garner respect to the Fremen. Each hunt, Paul will do more and more and more, and everyone considers him Mahdi. But Stilgar is still the Naib of the tribe. Stilgar is still the leader, but everyone says Paul should be the leader. He's the Messiah. He's the better fighter, right? Tradition says that Paul should lead this tribe, and the only way to do that is for Stilgar to be killed at the hands of Paul. It is decreed. So Paul had enough of that. And Paul thought, if I drink the water of life and I truly ascend to be Messiah, then maybe I won't have to kill Stilgar. Maybe I can avoid senseless murder from a very good fighter. Stilgar has, he's awesome. Why do I want to kill him when I can find a way to avoid this? When Paul drinks the water of life, he goes into a coma for quite some time. And, people think that he's dead. People want to take his water. Jessica tries everything that she can. Can't wake him up. They summon Shani, who comes and says, how long has he been out? What did he do? And she notices that he's got a little bit of a stain on his lips. She says, give me some water of life, and just trickles a little bit, and he wakes up. And it's like he had seen everything. And he has this great awakening, but the initial consumption of the water of life is very painful. The Bene Gesserit has to change the water of life internally. At that time, while you're changing the water of life, you are bombarded with all of the knowledge of the Bene Gesserit. So this could be Paul seeing everything that has happened before him. And even before this time, Paul had sort of an inkling of the future, but he wanted to know for sure what the path was. He would see many different endings all at once, just hitting him over and over and over again. And he'd had enough. Drink the water of life, put all of that aside. That could be. So this is running away. After the initial escape, they find Dr. Kynes. Dr. Kynes hides them out, tells them, shows them a hiding place. Duncan eventually finds them. Duncan holds them off. Lyette stays behind because even though the Harkonnen bust in, who are they going to find? Just Dr. Kynes. And she, in this movie, is the Imperial ecologist. What are they going to do? I answer to the Emperor. They can't kill me. So go. So Dr. Kynes shows Paul and Jessica out of there. They acquire an ornithopter that Dr. Kynes had been holding behind, and they make a run for it. The Harkonnen give chase, and Paul has an idea. There's a sandstorm. Nothing survives a sandstorm. Let's get in it. That's the only way we're going to lose them, is if we barrel headfirst into the storm. They'd be crazy to follow us. So they do. They barrel headfirst into this storm, and this is where Paul says, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear, turn to see its path, and when the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain, and in they go. The Harkonnen break off. I think the Harkonnen try to follow him, and one crashes. The other breaks off. They determine that it's if they can't survive, Paul and Jessica are not going to survive. In they go. And of course, the Baron has them killed because they couldn't do the job correctly. And it is just assumed. We've never seen their bodies. Of course they're dead. So this is how Paul and Jessica sort of fade into their new lives. Presumed dead. Bodies never found. Eaten by the storm. And if they weren't eaten by the storm, they were going to be eaten by worms. Hands are clean. I can tell the Emperor truthfully, I don't know what happened to the boy and Jessica, which is the truth. So this is Paul and Jessica flying headfirst into the storm. This is where Duncan would find Paul after the initial attack, my Duke. Paul at this point has not assumed the ducal title. He has a bag with him. Dr. Yui put the ducal signet in a bag and basically wrote a letter explaining exactly what happened. And he said, here is your ring. You are the Duke now. I saved this for you. So at this point, Paul has not accepted the fact that he is the Duke yet. But when people start calling him Duke, it makes him uncomfortable. He hasn't gotten that confidence just yet. So the initial sandworm encounter. So Paul and Jessica have had trials and tribulations up to this point. After the ornithopter crash, after the storm, they make their way on foot. They have their still suits. They have their paracompass. They have a tent, which I don't know if they'll show in the movie, but they camp out and they find this this sort of outcropping of rocks, and they get sloppy and drop their bag in a sand slide, and it gets buried. I mean, ultimately buried, and they don't know where to go without that paracompass and their supplies. So they feverishly dig, and they dig, and they dig, and they dig, and they try to get their supplies out. And Paul has to use a little bit of water from his still suit to have a chemical reaction in the paracompass batteries itself to cause the sand to part, so they can indeed pull their goods out. And it's just sort of scenes where we're seeing Paul and Jessica become desert people, trying to learn the hard way what it is to survive out here in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, they do a crossing and they begin walking, and they don't walk rhythmically, but they trip, and the sliding sand summons this worm, and they just start hauling the mail to the nearest rock as best they can. They start hauling the mail, running as fast as they can, and by the time they get to the rock, about here, the worm stops. Now, I didn't spoil it in my initial video, but what the worm hears right here is another thumper. So while they have stood perfectly still, the thump, thump, thump from nearby gets the worm to run away. They also comment in this particular scene, the overwhelming cinnamon smell. As soon as the worm popped up, that's all they smelled was spice. It was overwhelming indeed. And this leads to the realization that the worm is the spice. As a worm builds a nest and young makers are born beneath the sand, gases form and blow to the surface. And that's what deposits the sand on the surface, the birth and hatching of these worms to swim away on the surface. That's what gives the sand. So without the worm, there is no spice. And this realization that without the worm, there is no spice allows Paul a very advantageous position later in the story when he says, you know what, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill all the worms. I'm going to flood this planet, and there will be no worms. And without worms, there is no spice. So do what I tell you to do. So it's this initial realization that the spice and the worm are directly connected. They don't know exactly how at this point, but that's why they're called makers. Without makers, there are no spice. And it's after this that Paul and Jessica run into Stilgar and sort of barter for their lives and become an unofficial member of their tribe. So that's a little bit more in depth with the spoilers. If I misspoke or got something wrong, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm very thankful that I was corrected in the last video. Sometimes when my mind gets racing so quick that I do say the wrong thing or I misinterpreted something from the book. But if you enjoyed this video, let me know. And if there's another trailer, I'll break that down. And really excited to see what comes in the future. But that will do it for me. Like, share, and subscribe if you are so bold. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I will see you in the next video. Take care.